you needed to show Caesar's Palace, and they wanted the script. So unless you were a high roller out of Hong Kong or somewhere, and that was your little pet movie, you were not going to kill people in the casino and shoot there.
Right.
But if you're George Clooney and Brad Pitt and, we're going to let you shoot here at the Bellagio, you're going to show the Bellagio name. So what happened is that as long as they sell their hotel.
Locations go to 2. Nancy on 2.
This is Location Manager Nancy Haecker, and you're listening to me on Locations on 2.
This is Dodd Vickers, your host for Locations on 2. I'm also a location manager, and you can find me online at doddvickers.com. Locations on 2 is brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International. The LMGI is a global organization of location professionals working in the film, television, and commercial industries. You can find out more by visiting them online at locationmanagers.org. My guest on this episode of the podcast is location manager Nancy Haecker. Nancy has received numerous awards for her work as a locations professional while collaborating on such projects as Kill Bill, The Mexican, 3,000 Miles to Graceland, 13 Reasons Why, and Into the Wild. As you'll hear in this interview, Nancy does talk a little bit about her experience working with Sean Penn on the movie Into the Wild. And shortly after this was recorded, a news story came out talking about the removal of Bus 142 from the Stampede Trail. We just thought that was worth mentioning since that was information not available at the time of the recording. Let's switch on over for a chat with Nancy Haecker on the back channel where the work gets done, Locations on 2. I think it would be good to start this chat with you telling people a little bit more about yourself, Nancy, and where you grew up and how you got interested in the film industry.
Born in Texas, and the family quickly moved to California, Southern California. Bit of a boom in Las Vegas, and my stepfather was in construction, so we moved to Vegas, and I finished high school in Vegas. And on the night of my high school graduation, when the other kids were heading out to the party, I drove back to my house in a little apartment and loaded up my Plymouth Fury, and I drove to Alaska. And I didn't even realize there was a 1,000-mile dirt road. It was a pretty naive experience, but fun. And Alaska, I loved Alaska. It took me a year, but I loved Alaska, and it changed my life. And then at some point, in Alaska, and decided I wanted an education. I had gotten in with a lot of outdoor folks, climbers, and I ended up at the ski resort, working at the ski resort and being a climbing guide. And you end up with a lot of type A personalities. I mean, there was a day, an afternoon, and
I bet
we're having a salmon bake in my backyard in Bird Creek, and Reinhold Messner and Yvonne Chenard are in my backyard, along with a neurosurgeon and a judge. And I really felt like I wanted an education. And so from there, I went to school. I went down to Flagstaff, Arizona, Northern Arizona University. A group of us had come down from Alaska and kayaked the Colorado, and I just fell in love with Flagstaff. So, and fell in love with school. It was great. I loved college. By the time I got there, I was already in my late 20s, and then got into the Newhouse School in Syracuse and went there for a year, hated it.
Did you have a course of study or did a major of any kind?
I wasn't very directed. When I first got there, it was creative writing, journalism.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But I did not grow up, taking tennis lessons or swim lessons. So I spent I went to college for a lot of years. I took a lot of tennis classes and swimming classes and African dance and every 100 level art class. I had a blast. And just loved it. Going to Syracuse was Newhouse School of Communications, and I did have an interest in film, but writing, creative writing, and journalism was still, on my mind. But I then left Syracuse and went down to Tucson, and loved Tucson. So I finally finished up school 6 years later, University of Arizona in Tucson with a fine arts degree, sort of a minor in film. I and minor in film was because I liked movies.
Mm-hmm.
I knew nothing of the business and certainly made my little films and went to the video class and the sound class, et cetera, et cetera. And I made a couple documentaries and I liked the documentaries, but my emphasis was on screenwriting and that's what I focused on. Then I graduate, right? And it's the summer and there is a film in town. And I'm sure I read it in the newspaper, and it was The Postman.
Oh, yeah.
Kevin Costner's The Postman.
Sure.
And it was a huge film. It came on the heels, I believe, of Dances with Wolves. And so back in the day, I think it was 1997, it was an $80 million film or close to $100 million film. That was a huge budget. It was a crazy budget, especially no one was going into outer space. It was The Postman, apocalyptic.
Right.
Postman. And so,
that's funny. It's one of those movies. I love post-apocalyptic science fiction kind of films. And it seems to be one of those movies that you either love it or you hate it. I don't know why, but it seems to be no middle ground for The Postman.
It's soft serve ice cream. That's for sure. It's definitely, but I have gone back since and looked at the film and I went, this was fine.
Yeah.
Why do people hate it? It was fine.
I like it just fine. But anyway, go ahead and tell me how you got on the show.
So I find out who the location manager is. I don't even know who a location manager is. And I'm not even looking for the location manager. I'm just looking for a job. So I bullshit my way through the Warner Brothers or whoever it was. I can't even remember. I think it was Warner Brothers, and found out where Steph Benjamin was staying at a hotel in Tucson. And so I showed up at his door, knocked on the door. Steph Benjamin happened to be there. He answered the door. And I said, I'm a film student. I could use a job. And he said, come on in, and threw down a stack of photographs, right? Back in the day where we were shooting pans. And he said, put these together. He showed me the other envelopes, the manila envelopes with all the scout photos. And I sat there until he came back in the evening trying to put these together. And that's how I started in the film industry. And I kept going from there.
And it's funny because you're listed as a assistant location manager, I think, on that show. I'd have to look. And what was your role? I mean, when you look back at it now, were you really fulfilling that role, or were you just scouting? Were you just kind of filling in?
Well, it's interesting. I'm listed as an assistant location manager. I was not a union. I was really a PA.
Oh, okay.
And so that was not in the union. And I worked the set. I mean, I worked with Steph, and then Steph went on. It was a big movie. They shot in that huge copper pit in the mine in the Sayurita, Arizona. Yeah. Huge 2 miles set. I mean, the sets were huge. And if you go back and look at the film, the sets are awesome.
Yeah.
And then in Bend, Oregon, we were shot in Bend, Oregon for a couple of months, and then Medellin Falls in Washington, then an island off of Washington. And to this day, that set that is built on the side of an active dam.
Oh, yeah.
Water flowing is still, to me, one of the most beautiful sets I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
So, but I end up working the set. And there are hundreds of horses and, a crew of 250 or 3. I mean, it was a huge production. Mm-hmm. And that was back in the day, remember, in 97. And I'm the only location set person, just moving as fast as you can. It was crazy. I would swear to people that I didn't stop moving for 16 hours a day. I'm sure David Wilson, who was the location manager for Arizona, who came in to cover for Steph, and I'm sure people told me what to do and I was taught what to do. And that's what I did. And I took me to Bend, Oregon. I continued with it. It was almost a year. That show was almost a year. So that's what I did. And I worked the set. You had mentioned scouting. I did not even know there was an office.
Oh, that's
that
really funny.
Scouted, that there was paperwork to do. I just worked that set for that year, and then I think the first couple of shows after that, I sort of knew what scouting was. But I stayed on the set a while. My first, I don't know, I'm jumping here far ahead, but
that's fine.
My very first scouting job, and I did not know what it meant to scout at all. I mean, I didn't know that you broke the script down. We're talking basics. And it was on Any Given Sunday.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I had Derek Hill, production designer, had brought me down to Irving, Texas to work the stadium. It would be the locations person at the stadium. They changed it over all the time. So you can imagine those boys for the Cowboys, they really sell their product. They sell the stadium. And so there were weddings all the weekends, and they would paint it out. So it was the Sharks for the couple of days we were filming. And then they would have to put on a whole new turf and repaint most of the stadium. So they were bringing that stadium back to the Sharks in production. and then back to the Dallas Cowboys colors. So it was a busy set. So one day Derek says, Nancy, we need a bench. We need a bus stop. There's going to be a scene where the Jamie's character, the quarterback, goes out and he goes and visits his area, the hood, and I need a park bench. I need a bus stop. And so I say, okay, I'm going to go get a bus stop. I don't even have a camera. So I go buy a little Instamatic camera and I go figure out where Jamie's, where he grew up. I go there and I start shooting bus stops. No idea about controlling the bus stop, the bus, what a reverse was, where the trucks would go. I'm wired. My first scouting job, I think I'm scouting, right? And I go and I start shooting all these bus stops. And I come back and I go get the pictures printed. I come back and Derek looks at them and he might say a thing or two like, what about the reverse? Or, can we put the camera in the curb lane? And this is news to me, right? I'm not clued to any of this stuff. So I continue on. And he starts to show Oliver a few photos, right? And I'm like, holy shit. And Oliver, well, nah. So I do this for about 5 or 6 days and learn a little bit each time. This is certainly not how I learned scouting, but learned a little more each time. So around my 6th or 7th day, I go to a bus stop that I think is good. I understand that I need to have some production value in the background, a liquor store, something that sells, the neighborhood, Jamie's neighborhood. I need to have a reverse. Oh, he wanted a turn lane for the camera. And there were a couple of Asian women walking out of the liquor store. And I know that Oliver is married to an Asian woman and likes Asian women. He thinks they're beautiful. And I asked those 2 women to sit on that bus stop for me, and I take my photos, come back, and Derek says, oh, this is pretty good, blah, blah. Let's show it to Oliver. He shows it to Oliver, and Oliver says, yeah, this is it. So there was one scouting lesson that I learned in all of that on how to sell a location.
Yeah, and that's funny because I had a similar experience. I was sent out to shoot some porches at houses in a little neighborhood, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I think it may be why when I first started doing this, I really didn't like scouting. And I think it was because I didn't understand scouting. I hadn't really learned what I was doing yet. So I was scared to death of what I was doing. And I was, trying to deliver, here's that house. But it wasn't something I fell in love with until much later.
Yeah. And, now that you mention that, I don't know this for a fact, but I am going to assume that when you start in a locations department, right? Let's say you start shuffling paper for them or doing their petty cash or whatever, you're getting at least some training. It is often that you'll be an ALM or even a key, and maybe you haven't scouted, and they'll say, oh, go shoot this or go find a liquor store. And so that training, I think a lot of people have thrown at scouting without training. And so I would say that same was true with me. I think I got more training, and so I had more confidence. I know you had asked Il to be like managing or scouting, and managing makes more sense to me, or certainly in the beginning made more sense to me. But I think it was because I just had more on the job training, and there was a more practical aspect to it than all the nuances of scouting, and certainly scouting for tone and the vibe and all that goes with it, the aesthetic piece of it as well, the design piece of it as well, not just all the logistics that go with scouting.
Right. And it's the creative aspect of it that I appreciate so much more now. The logistic makes sense. The creative aspect, definitely you have to get more dialed into that. But it's probably the hardest thing to explain to people that don't know what a location manager is responsible for. Is not only is it the logistics and the practical, it is the creative.
Yeah.
So when you're asked to explain your job, which do you focus on?
I keep it simple and drone on so that they're not interested. I say, you're sitting there and you're watching TV and it's a cop show, and the cop car pulls up to a bank. The bank has been robbed, and the cop cars go into the bank, and the bank robbers are running out the back, and they run down the alley, and they get on the freeway, and they go to the airport, and they get in a plane, and they fly to a deserted island. I go find that bank and the street they park on and the alley they run through. And then I start talking about all the little pieces that go into not just finding these places, but
it being the right look and the action works and you can make your day and the hundreds of variables that we need for that location to work. And then they just get all glassy-eyed.
So what about today? Obviously, you're a veteran location manager now, obviously an experienced scout with some great experiences and some amazing projects under your belt. Which is your preference today? You were a screenwriter or an aspiring screenwriter when you first got into this. Do you really enjoy the creative aspect more or the more practical?
I would say I enjoy managing more.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm a bigger picture person. I mean, I think that's sort of innate to me. I'm a bigger picture person. I like solving problems. I work best under pressure, under deadlines, even though I will bitch about them and whine about them and hate them. I perform well. I'm definitely one of those people you want in your foxhole. I remain calm, that kind of thing.
Right.
I'm not saying I'm going to do the right thing every time, but I'll be in control, right? I'll have a plan. Even if you don't know the job and you're thrown at a location, let's say you're an ALM and you have trucks coming in at 3 a.m. and they want to park on this street. For me, I could make sense of it. 3 a.m. How many linear feet of trucks? Where are they parking? Who's driving the trucks? Whose house are they in front of? Do we need police officers? That stuff started clicking for me. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure a lot of experience had it clicking for me. Scouting was not the same. I had to learn scouting, differently. And I don't know how else to say it. But the nuances of style and architecture and layers and all those other things, the feel of the place, the vibe of this place. Would you live here? Do you feel at home here? Or do you feel ill at ease here? Those sorts of things, they sound kind of practical, but they were a little more elusive for me. And also the aesthetics piece of it is subjective, right? Yeah. It's wonderful when you're in sync with your production designer or your director, especially, I know that you had James Lynn and Ilt. And on the bigger features, I am going to assume it's still the same. And they're creating the director's vision on television, which I've been doing a lot more television, and even a high profile HBO one-off. I'm pleasing my UPM. My director may come and go.
Yeah, especially on TV.
So I think that managing to me is more cut and dry. Yes, no. Yes, the truck will fit there. No, it won't. Yes, I can close the street. No, you can't. But scouting, it's more subjective, and perhaps that makes me a little crazy.
So you worked quite a bit in Las Vegas when you were getting going, and obviously your familiarity, having grown up there, helps. And with the knowledge I have now from my experience as a locations person, I cannot imagine what it must be like to approach the casinos about closing down a road or filming inside the casino. Can you share a little bit what that experience is like?
Yeah, Vegas has its issues. What happened is when I did the Postman and then I went on to do big features, I had never done a small show, and I was the set person. And I did everything out of town, right? I needed to sort of settle myself or get settled somewhere. And having spent my high school days in Vegas, and I worked on films in Vegas as well before I even kind of made that decision. I want to move up. I want to get a little more settled, and I'm trying to get in the union now. Vegas was comfortable to me. I never liked Vegas, not even as a kid.
Oh, okay.
But I knew the town and I felt comfortable there, and I had seen the caliber of locations folks in Vegas. And there were some great folks there, but they could use some more really good locations people. So to be honest, I said, I'm going to Vegas and I'm going to own that town. Oh, that's going to go over well with other locations managers. But that's what I did. And I said, okay, that's where I'm going to get recognized. That's how I'm going to move up. That's where I'm going to get established. And so that's what I did. But back to the casinos, simply put, think of the casinos as you can shoot there as long as you don't get in the way of someone dropping a quarter in a
Well,
slot
exactly.
machine.
That's exactly my point. You know, I've worked on college campuses, and you're welcome to come film there. Just don't interfere with the student body going about their business,
Right.
because that is
That's
their
right.
primary mission, not what we're here to film. So yeah, come on in. We want to film robbing the place in Vegas.
What's great is they're the service industry, so they're yes people as well, and what happened in Vegas also, probably around the time I was there, is that at some point you needed to show their casino. In other words, if you wanted to shoot at Caesar's Palace, you needed to show Caesar's Palace, and they wanted the script. So unless you were a high roller out of Hong Kong or somewhere, and that was your little pet movie, you were not going to kill people in the casino and shoot there.
Right.
You know, but if you're George Clooney and Brad Pitt and, you know, we're going to let you shoot here at the Bellagio, you're going to show the Bellagio name. So what happened is that as long as they sell their hotel in the story, and the story works for them, and of course, high profile actors helps in Vegas as well. Then they're going to let you shoot there. So they became a little more particular about how their casinos were represented as time went by. And you were shooting off hours. You know, the prep crews were coming in at that off time, you know, 4 a.m. to get ready for a 6 a.m. Shooting call. And you were shooting from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. or whatever in certain parts of the casino floor, or certain sections of the casino floor. And you also often tried to cheat. So you might get your beauty shots at the Bellagio or pulling up to the porte-cochere at Caesar's Palace, but you shoot the poker room at Binion's downtown. I mean, if it works, right? So you cheated. And so there are some nuances in how to move around Vegas. There's certainly some nuances, and that helped me, you know, get my foot in the door there and be the one of the go-to location managers in Vegas. So I worked Vegas for a while, but at some point I did say, I got to get out of this town. I didn't care for a town. And it was actually on Kill Bill. Doug Dresser and I worked on the Mexican. He came up and worked. I was just finishing 3,000 Miles to Graceland. The location manager, Doug Dresser, was on the heels of that show with the Mexican. And then I jumped on with Doug on the Mexican. And then I believe the next film was Kill Bill. And Doug said, hey, you want to come down to LA? And then I made the jump to LA. But funny, I got the job on the Mexican the same way I got the job on the Postman, which is I found out where his hotel room was. And I went and I put my resume. I had called him, and I told him I was looking for a job, and he said, I've already hired someone. And I said, who'd you hire? And he said, I've hired blah, blah. And I said, well, when you fire that person in 3 days,
oh gosh,
I'll be here. Oh yeah. I'm sounding like a real smart ass, right? So, but that's what I said. I said, well, when you fire so-and-so in 3 days, I'll be here. And if you ask Doug will say, I thought this woman was a freak. She put a resume under my door at my hotel. I don't know how she knew where I was. And she's telling me I'm going to fire the guy and that I've hired in 3 days. But he did come and check me out. He did spy on me. He came down. We were shooting that that final scene, or one of the final. It wasn't the final scene, but the big machine gun scene. You know, at the casino, and we were shooting all nights. And I was on the set, just running my ass off. And he did come down and spy on me and go, okay, you know, okay, that's okay. And so when he hired that other guy 2 days later, he gave me a call, and I jumped on the Mexican with Doug, and then I joined Doug in LA for Kill Bill.
You've worked on several projects where the primary actor was also acting as an executive producer, and in some cases the director. And I'm curious, you know, I've had that experience, and rarely is that person really involved in locations selection until later. But it looks like you probably have had an experience where these people were involved much more early on than they are typically.
Well, you know, I wasn't scouting with Kevin Costner, but I did several of his films. In fact, he and his group, they were really great. Not just working on The Postman, but if I was between jobs and Kevin was working a lot then, and I could call up and say, hey, I need a job. And they would say, come on down. So they were really great about that. And so I certainly saw him in action, and he had a lot of control on his sets and a lot of control of the scouting and the vision of the film. whether he was the executive producer or not, but I'm going to assume that most of the films that I worked on with him, he was certainly an executive producer. But I think my favorite may have been Sean Penn on Into the Wild. He's so smart, so professional.
Yeah. I've never worked with him, but I've heard that from several people.
So prepared, so nice, so easy to be with. He doesn't overtalk it. He certainly doesn't overthink it, but he's already done a decade of homework regardless. But I really appreciated working for him. He was great. But Into the Wild was also a smaller group. And so you had access, and he was with us. So I wasn't, you talked about having to go through people to get the vision from the director. If in fact it's the director giving the vision, he was there. We were a small group. We were hopscotching all over the country. In fact, we hopscotched different seasons of the year as well. I've never experienced anything like that again. But he was there every day. So every day we're having breakfast in the Laughlin cafeteria or wherever we are the next day, and we're having dinner at that night, and we're in a scout band. So it's sort of, that one's easy. He was there and approachable, and he didn't have an entourage. He had one assistant that was there sometimes and wasn't most of the time. He would, there would be on most days, let's say Transpo was going to come pick us up at 5:00 or be ready by 5:00. So as a location manager, I know Transpo's early. So I'm there about 4:30, 4:40,
right.
4:30, 4:40, and I'll get there and Sean's sitting there. He's waiting. Now, he may have not gotten home and to bed the night before, but he was there and he was prepared. So I really appreciated him, and I loved that movie. I loved working on that movie. It may be my favorite experience, working on a film. It was incredibly unique. I've never scouted like this before. As you know, it's based on the John Krakauer book. I got to tell you, I think it's one of those movies, too, that I thought was ahead of its time.
Right.
I'm surprised it didn't get more acclaim. I thought it was.
What was different about scouting for that one? You mentioned it being a very unique scouting experience.
It was, because Sean wanted to be at the spots that Chris McCandless was. And so when someone says that, even vaguely, let's get out of that movie for a minute and say, I want to go to the hotel where they really were. You and I know that we're probably not going there. I mean, it depends on the show. It depends on the clout of the director. It depends on how far that hotel is, right? Right. And so we kind of discount it and go, okay, one of you has to go scout that hotel so we have it in our back pocket. But, my other scout, you go get something where we're really going to shoot. So Sean wanted to shoot at the places Chris McCandless really was. And Chris kept a diary and lots of photographs. And I had a copy of that diary and the photos. Now, in the Krakauer book, he does, I think he might show pages of Chris's diary, but he certainly shows photos. But I had a stack of them. And so I drove Chris's route. I would look at the photographs and I would say, he made it. He left Emory University and look, he stopped for a soda here at this. I have a photo of this Texaco station, and that's, and I would shoot that for the location if the location was in the film. And so I scouted like that. And even in retrospect, I don't know if I would do that again, but that's how I would scout it. I scouted with photos in hand, in a plastic bag tucked into my bathing suit as I swam across the Colorado River. I kid you not, to find this place in the bend where the saguaro cactus came up and looked just like this. And there was Chris's campfire, and there was the mountain range in the back. And I knew exactly that Chris had been in that spot. So I scouted the desert to Palm Springs, going into Tahoe, going all the way up down into Mexico, back to Dakota, and then up into Alaska that way. And boy, did I waste a lot of time. But that's how I scouted. And if I found it, if I sent scout photos saying this is where Chris's car was in the detrital wash, which is outside of Vegas, more towards Page, which you really can't say that because 15 years later, 18 years later, the desert has changed, the rainstorms. But I remember one time, I'm telling you, it was 118 degrees and I am scouting in the detrital wash and I have photos and I am trying to match up the horizon line, the mountain line, with the time of year and where the sun would have been, so that I could find the exact spot where Chris parked his car before the flash flood came in and pushed his car away. And I swear I found it. I was on the phone. I was standing in that wash, and I found the ranger that found his car 18 years later. The park ranger was now working up somewhere in Oregon. And I've got the guy on the phone 18 years later. I'm like, yeah, I was scouting for this film. And do you remember where you found his car? And the ranger was hysterical. He thought it was funny. But and so that's how I scouted. And again, even the Colorado, I kid you not. So there was a spot down in Topak, and I'm following the photos, and we have a scene there. Not every place Chris was, we had a scene, but there was a scene. And I think I know around the area that he had this little campfire and camped really just on a little piece of a ledge above the water line. And I had a kayak and I had to get out of the kayak, and I swam over there. I found it. I think I found it. So that was really fun. And that was really fun. And I really liked that movie. And it was also one of those, I don't know that you've asked this question before, but you have those directors too that have a level of clout.
Sure.
That Sean had. And I experienced that on the film, and it was pretty fun. There's a scene where Chris, and I think it made the movie, Chris is in a kayak and he goes through an irrigation ditch and goes into Mexico. And so we're trying to get that scene shot, and we're kind of on the border there, Mexico, Arizona. And I'm dealing with the Border Patrol on trying to make this happen. And I've been working for months and months and months at the border, and I'm making trips to Yuma. I mean, literally driving out of LA on Friday night, or whatever, Thursday night, to have a meeting with the Border Patrol and going back and forth. And so one day Sean comes into the office and says, "Hey, Nance, I hear you're having a little trouble with the Border Patrol." And he says, "Well, I know the director of Homeland Security. Maybe that would help." I'm like, yeah,
I think
that
so.
would help, Sean. That's awesome. Right. And so on this one instance, he takes his phone and he dials a number and he hands me the phone. And I think I'm going to get DC or someone in Yuma or someone's assistant. And the director of Homeland Security gets on the phone with me. Like, okay, this is awesome. And so that helped. And he did the same with John McCain, get the script. And I do tell him, and most scouts know, that you're not going to shoot in the Grand Canyon proper, in the river. They're not going to let you go. They're not going to let Sean Penn go. They're not going to let you go. And so we were certainly, took the scene down the Colorado to the Havasupai Nation, where a lot of people shoot the Grand Canyon. And he does the same thing one day. He says, "Yeah, I hear you're having problems. Think John McCain could help?" Like, yeah, John McCain might help. So he did that a couple of times. Emory University, the same thing. I'm like, "Sean, I'm not going to get permission that you can shoot your commencement during the actual Emory University commencement." "Well, my good friend knows the president." Okay, awesome. So he was full of those, which was quite helpful and fun.
Do I remember correctly, was the bus in the film the actual bus that Chris McCann had been in?
Yeah, it's the bus, and
you shot in the actual bus. It's still there?
Yes, the bus is still there. The bus in the film is not too far from the actual bus.
Okay.
They made a decision not to use that bus, but it's not far from the actual bus. And the Alaska stuff was intense. They went back multiple times for the seasons, for obviously all the snow in the winter, and then back in the spring to get the high water in the river and springtime. Okay, we'll send the entire film crew can be off for a little while, and then we'll go back in the winter. This doesn't happen anymore. Forever.
Well, that must have kind of kickstarted something, because you ended up doing a series of projects very similar to those, at least as far as the adventure and scouting you must have gone through for each. You did Revenant, you did Wild, all of these really big nature films that required a lot of travel, a lot of scouting, and finding pretty unique and hard to find locations.
Yeah, and if I could have picked my career, I would have focused on that. I love the hopscotching. I like travel films, and I think it came from living in Alaska. At some point, I
I was wondering
Yeah,
about that.
it's certainly, I learned to love the outdoors and to simply be outside. So yeah, Wild was fun as well. And another director whom was incredibly accessible was Jean-Marc Vallée.
Oh yeah, I had an
I'm wondering,
opportunity to work with him when I did the
isn't
HBO
he, he's
project.
brilliant.
Yeah, I did Sharp Objects with him. He was great.
Which was fantastic. I was in awe every episode of the mood of that film and the locations and just the vibe. You guys got it right.
Thank you. We had a great team on that, and obviously Greg Alpert leading us from California, and some great assistants. It was a great show.
It looked fantastic, and that's, when we were talking about scouting earlier, you're talking about a vibe, and I know a vibe is not a vibe. You often create it, right? And with the location and the movement of the camera and the music, and it goes on and on. But that was. I don't know if I would use the word stylized, but you guys got that right. Anyways, so I really appreciated Jean-Marc Vallée, and again, he's certainly an accomplished director. I think that was maybe. Oh no, he did Dallas Buyers Club, so it wasn't his first big.
Yes,
film.
Right.
He was certainly accomplished, but he was there all the time. And I certainly went through the production designer, who I adored. But
was that John Pano?
Yeah, John Pano.
I wasn't sure. He's great. He did Sharp as well.
Yeah, he's a wonderful man and so great at his job and so nice and easy to communicate with and accessible.
Yeah, it's a great team.
And so Jean-Marc as well. It was fun, though, the difference between the two. And really, I shouldn't be comparing them, but Sean, when he did Into the Wild, initially he was serious. He wanted us to be sort of a nomadic group to kind of travel in campers or tents. Or he really wanted it to be this small group, and Sean was willing to do anything. He was out there with everyone else, if not even more aggressive. He was. He was in the cold. He was in that 118-degree detrital wash in the desert. He was willing to do all that. And then Jean-Marc, he really wanted to get out of the van.
Oh yeah, and all natural light. No cable runs, nothing. It was amazing. I just that was awesome. Yeah, such a different experience.
Oh my goodness! On both films, now that I'm bringing up both films together. So on Into the Wild, the poor DP. I would ask him every time about the lights, and he would say no lights. There's, in his French accent, which I won't try to do. I would ask him anyways, because you don't believe the DP when they tell you there's no lights. And the same with Wild. But that was a great experience too, and I loved that. I loved scouting for that. We shot all over Oregon, all the desert. We only spent a few days in California, in the desert, in Mojave, in California, to shoot those scenes where she first gets on the trail. And so I loved crisscrossing Oregon to find all these pieces and to try to match it, with the locations. And I think we did a really good job, except for Owens Valley. I couldn't find that at all. But Jean-Marc was very much about the action of the film, or the emotion of the film. And with great respect to him, I don't know if at the end of the movie he knew a saguaro from a barrel cactus. But they were both wonderful experiences. And, when we talk about what we like to do, that was a film that I wanted to do. And I was sort of late to the party, and I can't remember where I was coming from. I might have been finishing up the judge in Massachusetts, and I read Wild on the plane, and I got off the plane at LAX and sat there, and I was thinking, who's doing this film? Somebody has got to be doing this movie. And I started making phone calls, and my timing couldn't have been better, because I did find the production company, Bruna's company, Reese's company, and I got through to them, and knock wood. And I'm still sitting at LAX hours later, because I sat there trying to find out who's making this movie. I want to be the location manager. And I got lucky. Location manager, and she's now UPM, Molly Allen, had called and recommended me. And so when I finally got through to the production company, they said, yeah, we were going to call you. And I'm like, can you come in tomorrow? And I stayed up all night looking at Oregon, topography maps and visuals. And I walked into that meeting prepared, and I got the job, which was awesome.
I just wanted to touch base quickly on another project that got a lot of attention, and obviously another nature-oriented film, The Revenant, which obviously known for filming in some pretty harsh conditions, beautiful film. And I think you did a little scouting for that as well.
What happened is I was the initial scout on The Revenant. And really what my job was, show where it wasn't at that point. We had talked about, and it was nice because Sean Penn had recommended me to Alejandro.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get a call. It's Alejandro. And we were talking about British Columbia and Calgary, and really assumed that's where it was going to shoot. But his early producers wanted to rule out some other areas. So I spent most of my time looking at Alaska, the Dakotas, and just really looking all over the United States, sort of knowing it wasn't there, but shooting it out. Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and they ended up going to Calgary. So I did that for about a year. And then when they changed producers and moved to Calgary, I was not involved in the project.
Which is something a lot of people listening to this may not know happens, that you sometimes are brought on to double check, to eliminate a location that they already know that is not probably a good fit for them.
Right. Yeah. So that was fun. And it was fun to get the recommendation from Sean.
Sure.
I have never read a script and the movie looked just like the script, like that, like what happened to me on that film. I'm watching the film and every turn in the river is as Alejandro described it or wanted it. Mm-hmm. It was perfect, except in the script, or when I was scouting, he very much wanted the final scene for the actors to break through the ice. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if that made the final script or they finally ran out of time and money and said, forget that scene. That's crazy. But boy, that looked just like the script, right? Or his description.
Most recently, you did a show that a lot of people would be familiar with called 13 Reasons Why. Tough topic. And I know because of the subject matter, you guys had some challenges. So.
It was, the experience on having challenges was the subject matter, and it was teen suicide. And then as seasons went on, it was rape and bullying and guns at school. I've never experienced this ever, that I got so many no's based on content from counties, from communities. Now, obviously I'm going to places. I'm going to a lot of schools. I'm going to a lot of communities in their homes. And people just said no. And there was, it depends on whose data you read. If you follow the 13 Reasons Why website and Netflix, and they give a lot of documentation on all the good that the exposing what goes on in high schools and exposing teen suicide and what that show has illuminated and done for that community. And then, of course, you'll read other information that says that it's contributed to teen suicide, but people wouldn't touch it. It was never experienced it. In fact, Stevie Nelson and Stevie was on the show with me, and we had to laugh. We had done a Peter Berg pilot years ago, and we had a scene where we're in a church, Catholic church, and bride and groom, the bride's pregnant, and at the altar, the groom takes out a sword and cuts the fetus out of the stomach, and both sides of the groom side and the bride, they all pull out swords and guns and start killing each other. And it's a bloodbath in a Catholic church. We had no problem finding a location for that. But, a show that, had a suicide in it, a teen suicide, they weren't going to touch you. And what was interesting too, because we were up north and areas that don't get a lot of episodic filming, they might get a lot of still photography. It's beautiful. We were in Napa. I spent 2 years in Napa. That was such a hardship. But I was surprised that people would think they could say no. I mean, entire communities telling me no. I'm like, what? Do you get to do that? Really?
Right.
So it was interesting, and then people just wouldn't touch it. Even Park Service, park services wouldn't. There were a few parks that wouldn't do it, and so you tried to find more private properties, and you tried to be prepared to talk about your show and what you thought the show was really about and what it did contribute, because the showrunner, who is a brilliant man, Brian Yorkie, they were quite sincere about that subject matter and how important it was, and how they wanted to illuminate how tough it can be to be in high school, and the issues kids have in high schools. It's, it's not happy days. It's not sock hops and, and malt shops. So yeah, that was interesting, that piece of it.
But was it more so when the second season came around because the show had gotten more exposure, or was it like that from the very beginning?
Right around the second season, because they had gotten a lot of press, but until the show drops, and Netflix went back and edited episode where our heroine commits suicide, which was truly a beautiful scene, quite frankly. It was haunting and heartbreaking, and there was nothing celebratory about that scene. Your heart broke for her and everyone that she knew. But often the folks that had the opposition hadn't seen it. It was what they'd read or what they heard. Because I would say, they'd say, no, we don't want to hear it. I'd say, have you seen the show? And it's no. It was really based on bad press.
Was that the hardest show you've had to deal with this type of thing? Or have you had other instances where you want to film something and once they find out what the scene is, it becomes an uphill battle?
Yeah, and I really can't remember too many shows where the subject matter through people. Every once in a while it does. And especially when you're working in episodic, there's no soft sell. You're moving too fast. You can't get surprised. So it's full disclosure right off the bat. Yeah. So I think it was the most difficult one. I did have a sort of a interesting thing happen back on Into the Wild. Sean Penn, Derek Hill, they wanted to shoot at the actual places. And so at the Salton Sea, there's the house where he meets the older gentleman, and a beautiful scene, right? A great scene, great piece of the story. And the folks that owned that house, I think that they had a Volkswagen shop or something up in San Bernardino, and they kept saying no to our proposal. And someone else was working on it, and talk them into it. Come on, give them this amount of money. What is the big deal, right? And we went back and forth. And so finally I said, I'm going to drive up, even though my scout, very competent scout, said they're saying no. So, and we've sent them the book, we've sent them gifts, we've done what we need to do. And so I drive up there and I meet with them, and we've already been there many times, so they're not terribly happy to see me. And we keep talking about the scene. And what they heard was that a young man, an older man, befriends a younger man, and they have a leather shop in the garage, and the older man wants to adopt the younger man.
Oh gosh. So they envisioned something completely different than what the reality of the story was.
Yes, even though we explained it many times, I got permission to give him the script pages, and the leather shop was just he dabbled in leather, and that's where Chris McCandless makes the belt with the icons on it. And but it took many visits, and yeah. And so they thought it was just kind of kinky.
So when you look back at all the projects you've worked on over the years, is there a specific location that you've brought to the table that you're particularly proud of? Something that you didn't know exactly how you were going to pull off? Or
we were scouting for Three Kings, and inner Arizona scouting, and it was Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf War, and scouting, and they didn't want to go out to the Alabama hills or the Mojave Desert, that sort of thing. They really wanted some sand dunes and just a desert where nothing grows, just dirt. And so I'm scouting all over Arizona, and we had shot in Sayurita in that huge copper mine on the Postman. And I was out in Casa Grande, and I went to a huge copper mine as well. And I drove up to the tailings, the big mound of tailings that happens.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah. And I'm on top of that mound, and obviously nothing is growing because all these chemicals, to get rid of the ore, to get to the copper. And it's a square 2 mile mountaintop. And I'm sitting there in my car going, oh my God. And because we're high, I had to drive up. I can't remember what the elevation is. You could sort of cheat the horizon line. I'm outside of Casa Grande, so you do see some mountains in the background, but I'm like, oh my God, will they go for this? It looks like this goes on forever, but it's really, this portion of the mine is just 2 miles square. And I was so hesitant to send the photos. I'm thinking, they're going to laugh. They're going to laugh at this. So I sent the photos without telling them where I was. And that's all you see.
That's a great tactic.
Oh yeah. And it was cracked, and the dirt was just cracked and not a single, there wasn't a twig on that, and they bought it. So we shot that, almost that entire movie was shot on that mine in Casa Grande.
Oh, really?
Yep. Except for the Mexicali and the sand dune scenes. We've ended up finding everything there, from the border to the bunkers. Well, the bunkers were built, but the bunker where the cars were, because these mines are huge. I mean, they're tens of thousands of acres, right? And so we ended up, but I remember sitting there going, no. And I'd already been up there multiple times. And then it hit me. This looks like it goes on for 1,000 miles.
Was it an active mine or one that had been closed?
It had been closed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
I was curious because we obviously have a similar situation with quarries. We had a beautiful quarry here in Atlanta, Bellwood Quarry, that was used by Walking Dead. And I filmed there with other productions, any number of productions filmed there. And now, of course, the city is converting it. It's a water basin for the city of Atlanta. So quarries, finding an active quarry where you can go to work has become a challenge. But anyway, Nancy, it's always good talking to you, and I really do appreciate you making time to join us on the podcast.
Fantastic. It's been fun.
And thank you again for joining us on the Back Channel, where the work gets done. Locations on 2, brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International. Find out more about the LMGI by visiting them online at locationmanagers.org. My name is Dodd Vickers. I'm your host. You can find me online at doddvickers.com. Until next time, it's back to 1.